Hello everybody, it's Matthew Street. Welcome to my channel. As always, I truly appreciate you being here. And folks, time for another Beatles countdown video. Yes, folks. You know, sometimes I get some really great ideas from some of my viewers and subscribers out there. And obviously I can't do everything with time and taking care of my dad and stuff. But once in a while, someone will give me a suggestion, and I just, I'm looking for something to do one day, and I say, hey, I'm going to give that a whirl. So one of my loyal viewers and subscribers, who goes by the name of Cameron, and he also has the handle name of Cats of Sherman. So if you see Cats of Sherman hanging out here, say hi to Cam. He's a great loyal person here, and I love having him as part of my channel. Well, he said to me, hey, Matt, how about doing a Beatles favorite books or Beatles best books countdown video? And I thought about it for a minute, and I sent Cam a link to a video I did about 5 years ago where it was some of my favorite Beatles books real quick, but I also threw in other music books that I was a big fan of and that I liked at the time. So it really wasn't a pure, just straight ahead Beatles book countdown video. So I decided, you know what? I'm looking for something to do today. Cameron had a great idea. So guess what, folks? It is time for the Matthew Street Beatles Top 10 Favorite Books video. Now, notice I said favorite. I didn't say the best. So many of you are going to see this video, and if you're not paying attention, you don't see that I put favorite, my favorite books. You're going to say, Matt, how could you leave this one out? Matt, how could you leave that one out? These are the best. I get it, folks. There's a gazillion Beatles books out there. And so many of them are so well researched. And as far as being the best Beatle books, yeah, there's a lot out there we could consider the best. I mean, for me to do that would just be impossible, So I had to go with my favorites. These are the ones that struck me for some reason. Maybe they have some sentimental value, whatever it is. But these are my 10 favorites, and I'll try to give a minute or two quick as to why they're my favorites or what they mean to me. Couple of quick honorable mentions, though. I always throw in a few honorable mentions. One of the most recent Beatle books out there. Is it the best Beatles book as far as information? No, but it's cute, okay? The Little Golden Book about the Beatles just came out. I recommend that one, all right? Now, Bruce Spicer has done a series of fantastic books on different albums featured and all kinds of stuff. One of my favorite Bruce Spicer books, and I'll give it an honorable mention, I only have one of them here, is a series he did on the story of Capitol Records. This one happens to be the albums. There's a volume 2 that's the singles. He's done an Apple, VJ, Swan. He's got all Parlophone, all kinds of great books, the solo years. But I chose this. This is one of his first, doing the volume 1 and 2 of the Beatles on Capitol Records. And it is absolutely stunning if you can find these books. Absolutely great. So I'm going to give that an honorable mention because it is a favorite of mine. Another honorable mention, obviously, it's not making my top 10. I know as far as research and information and anticipation of the next couple of volumes coming out, that it takes every 10 years for one to come out, you would think this would be in my top 10, but it's just an honorable mention. The Lewison series on the Beatles, this one being called Tune In, all these years, volume 1. Second to none. I mean, research-wise and information-wise and what you're learning about the Beatles-wise, yes. Is it a great book? Is it one of the best ever? Probably, but it's not one of my favorites of all time. Again, sentimental favorites. Another honorable mention has to be this one by Hunter Davies. The original, The Beatles, the authorized biography by Hunter. Goes way, way back to the late 60s. And, this happens to be I think this is an original paperback, by the way, that goes way, way, way back. I did have the hardcover at one time, and I still might have it around somewhere, but I couldn't locate it for this video. But, man, I mean, this book, it was in every school library when I was growing up. It was in every local little small town library when I was growing up. And before I had it, I would go down to my local little library down the street, and I would take this book out and just read it and gaze at it. And it was so sentimental-wise, it had to be one of my honorable mentions. And it could be one of the best Beatle books of all time. But as a favorite, no, it's not one of my favorites, but it definitely is up there in an honorable mention. So, okay, now my top 10. Number 10. Now, This book, information-wise, is probably horrible to you if you have it. Picture-wise, there's probably a lot of common pictures in it that we've seen a million times. But in 1975, Octopus Books out of the UK published a book just simply called The Beatles, and it's in hardcover, all right? The Fabulous Story of John, Paul, George, and Ringo by Octopus Books. How many have ever seen or have this little hardcover book here? All right, I got some news clippings on the inside. I always stuff things. Do you remember this book? Does anyone remember this book? Folks, I'm not going to go through all the books. We'll be here all day, but give you a taste. This is a sentimental pick for me. It's mainly pictures. There is some prose in here. There is some stuff to read, Beatle headline, but it's mainly a picture book. I mean, it's just, it gives a little bit of the soul years. Who remembers this book? Who has this book? I picked this as my top number 10 favorite Beatles book of all time because my parents bought me this book. This was my first hardcover Beatles book. I had magazines and informational materials like that prior, but in 1975, when I was 13 going on 14, my parents bought me this book, gave it to me as a gift. I don't know where they got it, how they got it, and it has been a sentimental favorite of mine ever since. Number 10. Number 9, well, I mentioned him in my honorable mention section, but here is where one of his books makes my top 10. Number 9 is a book that I got way back in the late 80s. It was published in 1986 out of the UK, and it's very hard to get now, but it's, I think, one of Mark Lewison's first ever books about the Beatles. It's called The Beatles Live, the Ultimate Live Show Reference Book. Folks, when this came out, I was mesmerized by it. It has a little flexi disc in the back here. I don't want to take it all up, but there is a flexi disc in there of an early interview the Beatles did, notes on the free disc. Again, I can't go through everything, but I'm just number 9 favorite of all time. I was mesmerized by the detail Mark went into to categorizing and chronicling all the Beatles' live performances. And it's an absolute favorite of mine, number 9. Number 8 goes back to 1989. Again, information-wise, there's a lot of great information in it. It covers a specific time frame of the Beatles, but I was just so taken with the design of this book, the pictures, some pictures I had never seen before in it when it came out in the late 80s, and it's called How They Became the Beatles by Gareth Pawlowski, The Definitive History of the Early Years, 1960 to 64. Folks, this book blew me away when I first got it. I was just so impressed with it and the research and time that Gareth Pawlowski put into this book and the great pictures. There's a lot to read, a lot to learn. It's not just pictures, but he put in so much great effort into this book with pictures of them in their leather gear, things I had never seen or experienced before. And I was always taken with this book by Gareth, and it's always been one of my top favorite go-to Beatle books, just to sit as I'm listening to the music and open this up and flip through the pages. I love it. So my number 8 is How They Became the Beatles by Gareth Pawlowski. And again, folks, for you might be saying, well, Matt, there's better books out there that cover those early period years much more. I'm sure there are. I'm sure they're more detailed. I'm sure, whatever. I'm sure there's been better books that have come out since. But I'm going with sentimental picks. All the books I show you in my top 10 and my honorable mentions, they mean something to me. They're important to me, okay? Now, number 7, and I have the hardcover, but I didn't dig it out, is The Complete Beatles Chronicle by Mark Lewison. This was another one of his that came out, few years later than the live chronicle there that I showed you earlier. This one, The Complete Beatles Chronicle, came out in 1992. It has a foreword by George Martin in it. And the detail that Mark went into, detailing a day in the life. It's like every day, what were the Beatles doing on a particular day, on a particular year during their career? And Mark chronicles all of that in this book, The Complete Beatles Chronicle. Hardcover I have the soft cover so I can flip through it and play around with it. This has always been a go-to book for me, and it will always remain very close to my heart. 1992, number 7, The Complete Beatles Chronicle. Okay, number 6. Again, the same author, Mark Lewison. He has an interview with Paul himself in this book. This is the Beatles recording sessions from 1988. And again, in the late 80s, when I got this happens to be a hardcover. You can get a soft cover. This chronicles all the recording in detail of the Beatles. How they recorded, who did what, when, every piece of music they recorded is chronicled in this book, and I absolutely love it. It will always be a favorite of mine. There may be other books that have come since that maybe do more, added more information. I don't care. Sentimental pick. It's always going to be in my top 10. Number 6, the Beatles recording sessions. Number 5 is another research book where it's providing information. This one came out in 2015, so it's probably the most recent book in my top 10, but I love this book. It's by Andy Babiuk or Andy Babiuk. I don't know how you pronounce his name. I apologize, Andy. I'll say Andy Babiuk. All right. The Beatles Gear. 2015, all the instruments used on stage and in the studio by the Beatles is chronicled, showcased, visuals, everything, details about it. And with this edition, you even got a signed 8x10 by Andy. Beautiful, beautiful image. Isn't that nice to get that with this, with the hardcover? There's been soft covers since. There's been updated books since, new editions of this book. The pictures are stunning. Not only is it great for the information about the Beatles instruments in the studio and on stage, but the pictures are stunning, showing the actual instruments in some cases. I mean, it's unbelievable. Amplifiers, every synthesizer they used. I can't go through the whole thing, but it's beautiful. You know it. If you're a Beatles fan, you must have it. But it will always be in my top 10, and it's number 5. It went that high because it's such a well-researched and presented Beatles book. Okay, number 4 is a book. Now, this may not be the best Bruce Spicer book. I mean, obviously, when I showed you my honorable mention, the Beatles on Capitol Records, on Apple Records, Parlophone. He's got so many books. He's doing an album series now that are fantastic. All great. I love them, okay? But this was one of the first Spicer books I got. It's 20 years old. Can you believe it? I can't believe it, but it is. It's called The Beatles Are Coming, The Birth of Beatlemania in America, with a foreword by Walter Cronkite himself, a legend broadcaster. Folks, this is my favorite Spicer book. Although all the others are probably more information and they're fantastic, but sentimentally, being a young Beatles fan of the United States, to read all about how the Beatles took over America. How did Beatlemania grab a hold of this country, grab a hold and never let go? Well, it's all chronicled in this book by Bruce Spicer. And with wonderful illustrations, wonderful information, the arrival. It's kind of fitting since coming next month will be the 60th anniversary of all this. And folks, I cannot stress to you enough how great this book is, and it's still available. I believe you can still get it where some of the Spicer books are out of print now and you're hard to find. I believe this one you can still get, and this is always going to be one of my favorites. I just love the way Bruce lays it all out. It's just so interesting. It's mesmerizing. It captures your attention and won't let go. It's great. And with the 60th anniversary of Beatlemania coming up next month, folks, Ed Sullivan Show, February 9th, get this book. Check it out. You won't be sorry. All right, so that was my number 4. Top 3. Now, the top 3, you're probably going to say, with a couple of them, Matt, there's not a lot of information in there. They're just basically fanboy books. So, well, call it whatever you want, but these are my sentimental top 3 ever. They just mean something to me. And the first one came out in 1976. Number 3 in my top 10. It's focused on one person's experience with Beatlemania, but I could relate to it so much, even though he was a little older than me and he experienced it as an older child. I was a younger child. I still love this book, folks. Ron Schomburg published this book in 1976. It's called Growing Up with the Beatles. Comes with a free poster. which I had a copy where I took out the poster, but this one I haven't yet. I'm keeping this one pristine, but there's a beautiful poster of this image in the book, and mostly black and white on the interior with the pictures and all, but Ron just takes the Beatles' career from the time they arrived in America 60 years ago, and he chronicles how he as a young child experienced Beatlemania, what it meant to him, how it changed his life, what it did to him. And it doesn't get much better than this, than a first-hand account of Beatlemania, folks. And I got this book when it first came out in '76. I was like 14 years old, and it just had an impact on me emotionally. It's just like, yeah, I can relate to what this older kid was going through. And so it will always be close to my heart as a Beatles book. Growing Up with the Beatles by Ron Schomburg is my number 3 Beatles book of all time. Favorite, didn't say these are the best, these are my favorites. My number 2, my parents bought me this book. So right there, you know, with my dad being elderly and my mom being passed away, they got this for me in 1980. Now, I was in the Air Force, had joined in 1979 after I got out of high school, went overseas for over 2 years, and I had been gone for well over a year, almost a year and a half, when I came home from my first leave. They call it being on leave when you're in the military. And it happened to be Christmas time, and I had missed a couple of Christmases prior, just the way the timing went. So I was home for Christmas. Big deal for my family that, you know, their oldest son, who was still, you know, a teenager at the time, I was 19, coming home for Christmas after a long time, a year and a half. And they bought me this book for that Christmas, along with other gifts. But this was a book, and it struck me as being one of my favorite Beatles books of all time. The text is by Jeffrey Stokes. There's an introduction by Leonard Bernstein himself. Andy Warhol did the cover art and included a poster of the cover art in the book. It's a Times published book, and it's just called The Beatles. 1980. Published, hardcover. There may have been a soft cover, but I don't have it. And Mom and Dad got me this book when I came home on leave, and it will always be a sentimental favorite for me, folks. Ringo there, George there, and there's a poster of it on the inside here that you can take out, and it's just a sentimental favorite. My parents got me this, and I gazed and looked at this book over and over and over again. There is some prose in here. There's some things to be read and learn about the Beatles. But the pictures to me at that time in 1980, when I got it, were stunning. I just was so taken by it. The generosity, just to be so touched that my parents would buy me a Beatles gift. Coming home on leave after over a year, being away from home, from family and friends, being overseas, and getting this book from my parents just melted me, folks, melted me. It will always be close to my heart, even though it's not the most informative Beatles book, even though many pictures in here have now been seen 1,000,000 times over and over again. This book will always be close to me. Thank you to Mom and Dad for getting me this book in 1980. I will never forget it. Number 2. And my number 1 Beatles book of all time, and again, I'm doing 2 20-minute videos in a row almost. Sorry, okay, but I just, these countdowns are tough. Number 1 of all time, it has, to me, had the best information at the time, the best pictures, the best angle. I love the author, the way he came across. It'll always be my number 1 favorite, and that's The Beatles Forever by Nicholas Schaffner. First published in hardcover. I have my hardcover right here. From 1977. But then a year later, Nicholas did a soft cover with an additional chapter updating what was happening in the world of the solo Beatles through 1978. So he published this softbound edition. But folks, no matter how you slice it, whether you have the hardcover or the softbound edition, this will always be my number 1 favorite Beatles book of all time. That young 15, 16-year-old kid who got the first edition in hardcover, I will always be in love with this book. It has great information in it. I learned so much in this book when I was a teenager about the band. The pictures burn into my brain. Every image and picture in this book means something to me because I remember it vividly, gazing at this book over and over and over again. And the writing of Nicholas was so spot on. Rest in peace, Nicholas. I wish he was still here to be sharing what's going on in the world of the Beatles. He died tragically so young, in his 40s, I believe. He'd probably be like close to 70 years old now. But what a fabulous Beatles book. It'll always be my #1 favorite Beatles book of all time, The Beatles Forever by Nicholas Schaffner. And that's it. 20 minutes. You PO'd at me. Matt, shut up. Get out of here. I will. But there's my top 10 favorite Beatles books of all time for Cameron Katz of Sherman. Thank you. Love you. Bye.